Are we on? Yes, we are. Okay, I think everyone seems to be here who's coming, and we're all gathered together. We've got a packed out group, so that is fantastic. My name is Dan Button, and I am the director of Gateway Theology School. So I want to give you a huge welcome and thank you for coming tonight. This is a very special occasion, which I'll explain in a moment. But I also need to give a special welcome on behalf of Christchurch. They've kindly agreed to host this event, and especially John back there, who's diligently managing all the IT and technology. But Peter Clarkson, who is the head pastor here, wasn't able to join us tonight, but he sends his regards just across there. So if you're ever passing by and you want to stop in at Christchurch and see what they do on a Sunday. It's an interesting church because there are 4 different denominations that are part of this one church, and they sort of alternate the worship styles and things. So it's quite a fascinating place. So welcome to everyone. I tried to talk to everyone as you came in. I missed 1 or 2, but it's great to have you here tonight. And now I want to introduce our speaker, Stephen. So Stephen is a friend and a colleague. We've known each other for about, quite
4 or 5 years, actually.
Yeah, more than that.
Longer than you might think. Yeah, absolutely.
At least 10, but anyway, because I met you at the Bishop's Garden.
That's right, we did, absolutely,
way back.
Yeah, it's quite a long time ago.
So we've been colleagues for a long time, but it was many years before I knew what he did I knew him as a priest in, what was your other parish?
In Chedworth.
In Chedworth.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that he was also a scientific theologian and an ethicist, an ordained Church of England minister, also trained as a pharmacist working in hospital pharmacy.
I have a uniform for each different role. Yeah, I'm joking.
Yes. And his PhD in theology comes from Exeter for work on, get this, an ethical reevaluation of proposed transhumanist biomedical technologies in the light of the impact of widely adopted advances in pharmaceutical medicine in the 20th century. And he's recently written a couple of books, Transhumanism, Ethics, and the Therapeutic Revolution, Agents of Change. Now, I don't recommend these as light reading, but many of you here have a very deep interest in this topic, so you might just be interested in these books. The other one is
Christian Ethics and Biomedical Innovation.
There we are, Christian Ethics and Biomedical Innovation.
There we go.
Okay, and Stephen comes to us all the way from Chipping Norton, and thankfully the snow wasn't bad enough to prevent him from coming.
It was, yeah. Thank you.
Now, the last thing I want to say, if I was just reading something from BioLogos recently, and it said this: artificial intelligence is one of the defining issues of our time. Like most technology, it can be used for great good or great harm, but it's not neutral. It's already changing the way we live, learn, and relate to one another. The title of this talk is quite interesting. He called it I, Thou, Robot. And some of you might be familiar with a famous book called Ich und Du, it's German, translated I and Thou, which was written by Martin Buber in 1923. And in that, he proposed that we may address existence in 2 ways. The attitude of the I, the self, the I, toward an it, toward an object that is separate in itself, or the attitude of the I towards thou in a relationship. There is no such looking at that. We sometimes think, when we study theology, we're studying God. No, it's not. It's an I, thou. It's a relationship. And in that relationship with the other, it's not separated by discrete boundaries. So one of the themes there is that human life finds its meaningfulness in relationships. All relationships bring us ultimately into relationship with God, said Buber, And every time someone says thou, they are indirectly addressing God, even addressing each other. We are all created in God's image. And he said, you need God in order to be, and God needs you for that which is the meaning of your life. When we come to AI, as you'll soon hear, AI and robotics, we are beginning to deal with beings that think, in a manner of speaking, that can learn in a way, that have a certain sense about them that takes them beyond the it and into a thou. In fact, many people are already finding that they are relating to their AIs or their companions or whatever in ways that, yes, they may be projecting, but they're projecting human qualities. What does that mean? And what does it mean to God as machine beings become more sentient? And like me, if you've heard TED Talks or anywhere you look, there's things about AI on the news. Everything from this is the end of humanity, we're sowing the seeds of our own destruction, this is the new Tower of Babel and we're all going to drop off the cliff, to this is the salvation of humanity, it's the next revolution, best thing since farming, and of course everything in between. So, with that introduction, let me hand over to Stephen Goundrey-Smith. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, well, thank you very much for your introduction, Dan. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening, and a big thank you to all of you who've perhaps come out in what was certainly earlier on today rather unprepossessing weather conditions. So it's great to see you here, and I'm jolly glad to be here. So here we are for a theological exploration of robots and their status as moral creatures. Now, you might think, robots? Surely this is the stuff of science fiction. What's it got to do with living as a Christian in the real world today? Well, two things. First, technology is rapidly moving on. With the advent of artificial intelligence, we now have intelligent digital systems in our society. Exactly how intelligent AI systems are is a really important point that we'll touch on later. But in my view, AI systems are a really important step on the journey towards a world where we share our lives with autonomous humanoid robots. Secondly, when robots do become commonplace at some stage in the future, living among us, resembling us in some ways, but not others, I'm sure that we can all see that they will be highly disruptive to the way we live life and to our society, and will introduce significant questions. Questions like what being human is all about. How can we ensure a fair and just society in this mixed economy of people? What does Christian spiritual life look like in this world? What is the church ultimately for? And how on earth will it all end? And I don't have to tell you here gathered this evening that these questions are very much within the domain of Christian faith and related to God's purposes in the world revealed in Jesus Christ. Now, in the past, technological advances have kind of crept up on us and changed culture before we even knew it. We cannot let the same thing happen in future with highly disruptive technologies. So I'm a firm believer in attempting to reflect on technological issues in advance, because forewarned is forearmed, and then we can be ready for when the droids come marching into our world. So here we are. But before starting to get into the depths of some of this stuff and about our future robotic companions, let me say just a little bit more about me and why I'm giving today's talk, other than the reasons that Dan has already mentioned. So I'm a Christian theologian and ethicist working on issues relating to futuristic technologies. Some of those are biomedical technologies, things we do to our bodies. Some of those are digital technologies, the way we use digital systems. Now, I'm a pharmacist by original professional background, and in my professional work, I'll let you into a secret, I have had some involvement with some of the robots that are already at large in our society today, more of which in a moment. I've been in Christian ministry for over 20 years, and I'm also a teacher of theology and ethics, and I've met some of you here this evening in that capacity before, and it's great to see you again. But what I must say straight away is I'm not a cybernetics expert. I don't know a great deal about robots technologically. And while the technological aspects of robotics might be interesting, it's the theological and ethical issues that are really fascinating and which should be of interest to any thoughtful Christian in today's technological world. However, where I do have knowledge of robotics is through being a long-time avid fan of sci-fi TV and film, having grown up with Doctor Who, Star Trek, Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, and many others. So while robots may be currently in the realm of science fiction, they have been part of the popular imaginary for many decades, since Isaac Asimov's novels, if not before. And we will meet some of these well-known robots in a moment. So in this evening's talk, I'm going to cover the following ground. So first I'm going to define a robot and classify what classes as a robot. Second, I will introduce you to some of the robots that have already been envisaged in popular culture and in our world today. Third, I'm going to introduce a method of Christian ethical analysis which we could use for all kinds of futuristic technology, which involves evaluating the technology according to four domains. Autonomy, nature, whether how natural the technology is, autonomy, embodiment, and the imago Dei, the way in which technology reflects or affects the way humanity is made in the image of God. And then fourthly, I will apply these four principles to the science of futuristic robotics that we might encounter in the world in the future. And finally, I'll conclude with a call to action for us as Christians, and indeed all people of goodwill living in a rapidly advancing technological world. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. There's quite a bit of theology here this evening, but also prepare to be challenged. Some of the themes I'm going to explore this evening are not ones that you typically hear theologians talking about, and they are not things that you typically hear talked about in churches. And you may not think some of them are appropriate, but what I would say is that they are all part of the conundrum of being human in the world. And they are certainly things that our culture is concerned with. So they should be of interest to us from the perspective of mission and evangelism, reaching out with a message of redemption and hope to a messed up, hurting world. So let's begin. What is a robot? Well, here's a definition from the Encyclopaedia Britannica. Now, if you're as old as I am, you may remember that the Encyclopaedia Britannica once occupied significant shelf space in your local library. But now this august publication is available as a very handy-to-access online resource. And this definition says as follows: a robot is an automatically operated machine that replaces human effort, although it may not resemble human beings in appearance or perform functions in a human-like manner. The term robot comes from the Czech word robota, meaning forced labour. And I'll come to explain a bit more about that in a moment. Now, most dictionary definitions agree that a robot is a machine that operates automatically, but this definition from the Encyclopaedia Britannica is particularly helpful because it adds two important dimensions. So firstly, the purpose of these automatic machines is to replace human effort. However, also, robots may look human, they may be humanoid, but some may not look human, and they may not perform tasks in a human-like manner. So you'll be interested to learn that the term robot, as we see here, it's a Czech word, and it comes from the 1920 play by the Czech playwright Karel Čapek, entitled RUR, Rossum's Universal Robots. And this play was about a company that manufactured human-like machines to do hard, dull, and dangerous work instead of humans. But what happened in the play is the robots eventually grew to resent their jobs, and they rebelled against the humans with disastrous results. And this word robot found its way into the English language in 1922 when the play was translated into English. And robots have been with us ever since. But while the dictionary definition of a robot is of an automatic machine that does tasks, and the origin of the word robot suggests that this is a menial role, this is actually a very broad definition. And there's a lot of debate about what might qualify as a robot. We are more likely to think about a robot as being an automatic machine that is humanoid in form. In other words, it looks like us in physical appearance. And we're going to look at some humanoid robots in a moment. But there are some other things that are often treated as robotic in popular discourse. So first, computer scientists often refer to software routines called bots. Now, I don't regard these, that they are things that do automatic tasks with software. I don't regard these as robots because they work in a virtual workspace, not in a physical workspace. So secondly, we may well have come across the idea of cyborgs in science fiction. And a cyborg is half human and half machine. So it doesn't have a wholly machinic physical nature. It comprises of synthetic and organic components. Synthetic means that it's made by humans from inorganic components, whereas organic means it is living tissue. Now, cyborgs really are probably quite a long way off, but they're of great interest theoretically to philosophers and theologians because they have two natures, and therefore they are analogous to humans with their material and spiritual aspects. And indeed, the feminist theorist Janine Thwaite-Bates has described Jesus with his divine and human natures as the ultimate cyborg. Well, be that as it may, a cyborg is very different to a fully synthetic robot, which is what we're thinking about this evening. Now, the third term that often gets mentioned in relation to robotics is artificial intelligence. Now, hang on there. We all know a thing about AI, don't we? We've read in the media about how AI will change our world. Now, of course, there are big questions about how AI actually is. Is it really intelligent? AI is able to perform much more complex tasks than conventional computing. It is self-learning. It is capable of acting autonomously, i.e. on its own. And it can perform many rational tasks better than human beings. But there are two things that AI does not have. So firstly, it does not have the interiority of the human mind. So it can't do reflective things. So it's not very good at things like empathy and moral deliberation. And it can interact with the world physically in only limited ways. For example, as the control software of a surgical robot doing a specific procedure. And that's quite different to our human bodies, which as physical agents are highly versatile. So again, I don't think we can say that AI itself is a robot. However, the important thing about AI in relation to robotics is that if we can develop a human-like AI and situate it in a human-like physical but mechanical body, we would have a very powerful robot. AI software is what will power robots of the future. But for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to define a robot as a fully synthetic, automatic, intelligent, autonomous machine that is preferably humanoid in physical form, and so in theory can do a lot of the things that humans can do. So let's move on to think about some of the robots that we have already encountered in the world, in our imagination, if not in everyday life. But before I introduce you to some robots that I think you will know, I'd like to introduce you to a robot that you don't know, but who I know, and who is already busy at work in our health service. In fact, one of these robots is at large in this very city. So, this is a BD Rower VMAX 160. It's a pharmacy robot. It's a large hospital pharmacy department will stock thousands of different medicines, and of course for patient safety it is vital that the right medicine gets to the right patient. And a robot like this enables the stock in the pharmacy, which may include 10,000 or more items, to be managed well, and it picks the medicines more accurately than a human dispenser. Now this one here is located up in Yorkshire, and it's one that I took while I was doing some research there, but there is a machine just like this in Gloucester Royal Infirmary Pharmacy, Hospital Pharmacy. It is a robot according to the Encyclopaedia Britannica definition, in that it's an automatically operated machine, but actually that's as far as it goes. It is not at all intelligent. It only does what the Pyxis control software tells it to do. It can't operate autonomously. And its physical functions are limited to the task of selecting medicine packs from a shelf inside the machine with a picking arm. It's not going to be doing brain surgery anytime soon. But let's meet some robots that we may all know from the public imaginary. Robots that we probably won't meet, in fact we certainly won't meet, when we're doing our shopping in Tesco tomorrow. Now these robots are all intelligent and autonomous, and they can act independently, and they all look humanoid to a greater or lesser extent. Other than that, they're all slightly different. So here's our first robot, C-3PO from Star Wars, who was first seen on Star Wars A New Hope on our cinema screens in 1977. Now, C-3PO was a companion of Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, and Han Solo and friends in their battle against the evil Empire. C-3PO, as we see, is humanoid in that he has a body shaped like ours, with arms, legs, and a head, but he is quite clearly metal. As well as being intelligent, he has a personality, that of a somewhat querulous old man that you might meet down the pub. He offers his opinion rather too freely about anything, and he makes a fuss about everything. But he is a loyal servant of humanity, and as a robot, he is our friend. Our second robot is quite different. Meet Six from Battlestar Galactica. Six, by the way, is the female-looking robot on the left-hand side there. Six is one of the Cylon robots in Battlestar Galactica, who looks very human indeed, but is most definitely the enemy. And much of the dramatic tension in Battlestar Galactica comes from the fact that the enemy robots, the Cylons, look very human indeed, and have infiltrated human society, giving rise to widespread distrust and paranoia. Of course, not only does Six look very human for a robot, she also looks very feminine and alluring. And she successfully seduces Dr. Gaius Balthar, the rogue academic turned politician. That's the guy in the picture on the right, who is a morally weak man, in my view. Six is presented in the programme as, at best, morally ambiguous, at worst, a present threat to humanity. As a robot, she certainly is not our friend. And so to our third robot. This is Lieutenant Commander Data from Star Trek Next Generation. Data is a member of the Star Trek Enterprise crew as they boldly go where no person has gone before and all that sort of stuff. And Data looks a bit human, but you can tell by his pallid complexion and his translucent eyes that he really isn't. Data's non-human insights help the crew as they encounter new alien species. And as the series progresses, we see that Data is on a journey of discovery. So he is gradually learning more about what it means to be human, to be an intuitive person rather than being a rational robot. As a Starfleet officer, Data is loyal to the Enterprise crew, but he is a little aloof. As a robot, he is our friend, but he isn't one of us, and he is an honest, objective observer and inquirer about what it means to be human. So there we go, 3 robots, all synthetic, intelligent, autonomous, and broadly humanoid machinic beings, but with slightly different forms and very different roles in the story, whether as friend or foe or as objective observer. And in fact, this suggests to us that robots could be as diverse as human beings are. Now, we, the viewers, know that these beings are robots, and the script writers use these robots not only to explore what robots might be in the future, and how they might respond, but to explore what humans are like and how they perhaps should behave. And these insights drive plot development. That these robots are not real at the current time, but what they do is they serve to hold up a mirror to us so we can see what it means to be a human person. And this, of course, catapults us very decisively into the realm of religion and Christian faith. What does it mean to be human? Where do we find significance and hope in the imperfections and challenges of life? Now, the biblical witness and Christian theology doesn't have much to say about robots, which, let's face it, shouldn't surprise us for a word that only came into the English language in the 20th century. But the Bible has an awful lot to say about being human. Now, some of this is through narrative, where the Bible describes God's dealing with his people. Some of it is through legal material, where God sets out laws to enable his people to live together peaceably. Some of it is through the wisdom literature, where the Bible provides aphorisms and wise sayings about the human condition. But of course, most importantly in the Bible, one of the most important things we learn about being human is through the lens of Jesus, who is the image of the invisible God, Colossians 1 verse 15, and who is perfectly two natures. He is fully God, but he is fully human. So, I'm going to take a little short mind break now, so please don't move from your seats, but turn to your neighbour and have a quick talk about what is important about being, what do we think is important about being human in a robotic world, in a future robotic world. What will be important about being human? You've got 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Okay, folks, I'd like to draw us back together. So the purpose of that short intermission was to give you, to loosen your minds a bit and give you a little bit of reflection time. Now, maybe some of you have got questions, and I'm going to come to those questions at the end. There'll be plenty of time to ask questions. So just store them up in your mind or on your phone for later. But just imagine a society where robots are living and working among us, just as the robots in those TV programs are. What theological and ethical issues might arise? Well, there might be questions like, my clicker has just stopped working. Oh, no, I've gone too far. There we go, that'll do. That's great, marvellous, thank you. So the questions we might have are going to be things like, what makes humans different to robots? How can society be fair and just in a world where humans and robots coexist, and where robots may well have greater powers than humans? Does it matter if we cannot distinguish humans from robots? How might humans hope to be treated by robots, and vice versa? Do robots have any existential fears or transcendent hopes as we do? Now, if we think for just even a moment and we see how sci-fi writers use robots as a cipher for the human experience, we will realise that all of these questions are not necessarily new, but could equally be relevant within human society as it is now. The different races, cultures, sexualities and neurodevelopmental statuses in society provide a diversity among human beings in which questions of justice, hope and differentiation of experience can equally arise. So we therefore need to look into the theological and ethical issues a little bit more deeply and with some more specific tools. So let's face it, if we wanted to examine a robot technologically and understand what robots were like under the surface, we'd need the right tools, wouldn't we? We'd need our box of spanners or whatever. Well, we also need to use the right theological tools for ethical robot deconstruction, so we can gain a more nuanced view of the ethical significance of robots. Now, I have to say there's some great scholars working in the field of robotic theology. One of the best is Scott Midson, based up in Manchester, Robert Geraci from the States, Simon Ball. Probably the closest thing that comes to a kind of like a checklist for the evaluation of robots has come from Simon Ball, who has proposed 4 theological dimensions of a society that is a robotic society, about anthropology, eschatology, ethics and religious practice. Now, Ball's 4 dimensions here help to provide an objective framework for theological analysis of robots, but as you can see, ethics in the broadest sense is only just one of the considerations here. And I think we need to have a more detailed ethical examination if we're going to explore these questions of morality and right and wrong of robotics in greater depth. So here I'm going to propose another 4-point framework, my own in fact, as a way of evaluating robots ethically as an emerging and future technology. And as I say, this is about an ethical evaluation of robots according to 4 domains: nature, and natural law, autonomy, embodiment, and the imago Dei, human createdness in the image of God. And I'm going to say a little bit more. This 4-point framework I developed in my PhD research at the University of Exeter, which was subsequently published as this book, Transhumanism, Ethics and the Therapeutic Revolution, in 2023. It's an ethical framework that's based on reflection on transhumanist technologies in the light of medical ethics to date. And in order to see how this is going to be helpful to us, I'd like to explain this project in a little bit more detail and about transhumanism and why I developed this framework. So transhumanism is essentially a philosophical movement which believes that human nature can be transformed for the better by the application of biomedical technology. According to transhumanists, humans can develop their functional abilities, increase their life expectancy, and improve their experience of the world by adopting biomedical technologies to enhance themselves, either by, for example, gene editing, cybernetic components, nanotechnology, and other kind of implants and enhancements. By applying these technologies, humanity can achieve perfection in this world. And if these technologies are available, well, humans should use them at will. Well, I'm sure we can see straight away why many Christians might not be comfortable with this kind of technological liberal optimism. It provides an alternative perfection to Christian salvation and spiritual growth, and yet one that does not adequately tackle the issues of sin and evil. It provides an alternative realized eschatology on earth rather than the hope of Christ, of life with Christ in heaven after death. And the idea that futuristic biomedical technology should be applied at will with unbridled autonomy is hopelessly naive when we consider the huge injustices in our world today, at least some of which are technologically mediated. So the question I asked in this research project is, how far can we go with futuristic medical technologies and still use them in a way that is permissible from a perspective of Christian ethics? And I did this by looking at ethical issues with biomedical technologies that are already available. In the last 70 years, there have been two important biomedical technology developments: the hormonal contraceptive pill and Prozac-like antidepressants, which can be used for personality manipulation. Now, both of these biomedical technologies have some of the characteristics of transhumanist enhancements, that they are both things that have implications not just for the individual person, but for culture and society as a whole. They are not just for the correction of defects, they have some additional properties. Now, both of these biomedical technologies were criticised by the Roman Catholic Church from a perspective of natural law. Okay, so a little bit of background on natural law. It's the idea that a creature flourishes when it can live according to its nature, and anything that interferes with that nature is innately bad. This is an idea that was adopted into Christian theology from the philosopher Aristotle by Western theologians such as Augustine and Aquinas. And the Catholic Church criticised the contraceptive pill and Prozac antidepressants because they constitute willful interference with the natural operation of the human body. So the Church condemned them as intrinsically bad and contrary to human flourishing. However, there are two problems with this approach. First, there are many scientific and philosophical problems with the application of natural law to the material actions of drugs and other biomedical technologies. And secondly, despite the natural law objection, we know that both of these things, the contraceptive pill and Prozac antidepressants, can be used for good ethical purposes in the wider human context. So following a scientific, cultural and theological analysis of the development of these medical interventions, I therefore concluded that a natural law-based approach alone is not sufficient for Christian ethical evaluation of future biomedical technologies. Future biomedical technologies will interfere with nature, but they may still have beneficial effects for society. So instead, we need to use this four-domain approach. One that examines them ethically from the perspective of natural law, because nature still provides us with a guide to human flourishing in society, but also three other ethical concepts important in the field of Christian bioethics: autonomy, embodiment, and the imago Dei, the idea that humans are created in the image of God. While this four-domain framework was developed from the evaluation of biomedical technologies rather than digital or robotic technologies, it does not envisage any one type of technology, and in theory could be applied to any technological development. And furthermore, not only does it focus on the analysis of theological ethics with the technology rather than just theology, it is also firmly rooted in Christian thinking on human nature and behaviour. And so in my view, this four-point framework is very suitable for applying to Christian ethical evaluation of robots in terms of their morality as machines, with, as I say, an important difference that while invasive biomedical technologies have a reflexive component, we do them to ourselves, robots are wholly a technology separate from humanity of human creation. So we are assessing the implications of their existence for our humanity. So how does it work out when we apply that analysis? Well, here goes. So if biomedical interventions such as hormonal contraception are contrary to nature, surely so is a humanoid machine that is entirely synthetic, regardless of how intelligent or autonomous it might be. After all, we as human beings are made of carbon-based organic matter, whereas a robot, not a cyborg but a robot, is made of metal and silicon-based inorganic matter, so is of a completely different nature to us. On the face of it, we might think that a robot is the ultimate infringement of natural law, and indeed a standard cultural response to the idea of intelligent, autonomous, robotic life is one of suspicion. These robots are not like us. They don't think like us. We can't trust them. But this is a cultural response. Yes, of course, mechanical beings will operate differently to human beings. Their joints are lubricated with petrochemicals, ours with synovial fluid. The chemistry is quite different. But robots will operate according to their nature. It is just a different nature to human nature. And artifacts, created things, are not contrary to natural law. So Aquinas saw art and craft as a virtue of the practical intellect, is how he described it, an appropriate expression of the rational human. And so the arts and crafts are part and parcel of human flourishing. So a robot would not be contrary to natural law, as they would operate according to their material nature. They are not intrinsically bad, but crucially, we must accept that they are artifacts, created things. They are not human beings with a particular rationality and a particular relationship with God. They are objects that humans have created. The application of natural law doesn't move us a great deal further than this in questions of robot morality, but it does alert us to the really important basic fact that ultimately robots are created objects, not human subjects. Okay, so let's move on to our second domain of analysis, autonomy. Now, before we think about autonomy in relation to robotics, we might wonder why autonomy is important at all in any Christian ethical analysis. After all, autonomy, the idea of self-direction according to your authentic will, is surely a concept of modernity from the non-religious ethical system of Immanuel Kant and the libertarian thought of John Stuart Mill. Quite apart from the fact that autonomy is illusory in some circumstances, most notably at the beginning and the end of life, autonomy seems at first sight to be in conflict with God's sovereignty over creation as the omnipotent creator, and the idea that we should be obedient to God as his creatures if we wish to follow him. However, autonomy, the ability to direct one's own life, is considered a good in itself in a modern democratic society. It is also one of the four principles of medical ethics, along with beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. But most importantly, how can we exercise any Christian moral responsibility unless we have the self-determination or autonomy to do so? Like it or not, autonomy is important when thinking about what humanity is and how we can be moral in the contemporary context. And that means that autonomy is important in thinking about the ethics of robots. However, while with biomedical enhancement technology, we are considering the effect of the technology on the autonomy of the human subject to whom it is applied, and that's a big question with the Prozac antidepressants. With robots, we are considering the autonomy of the robot itself as an intelligent being. Can it act autonomously? Now, as they emerge, robots will be more or less autonomous depending on the artificial intelligence that powers them. And if there's already a big debate about the extent to which AI systems are autonomous. Now, they may have causal agency, they can make things happen independently of an operator, but because of their lack of mental interiority, they can't, as yet, be moral agents. But I'm not going to dwell on that debate. But the fact is, there are ethical problems either way. If robots are not that autonomous, then we have to ask the question, what external agent is controlling it if it is not us? It may be someone who is not nearby and who therefore can evade responsibility for their actions. That is essentially the problem we have with autonomous weapons used by the military. Even if the military power is a benevolent one and the war is in principle just, autonomous weapons can extend the reach of the attack in ways that may be unjust, inhumane, and have unintended consequences. And that's before we get to the scenario where the autonomous weapons fall into the hands of a malign power or a bad actor. But what if the opposite is true, and the robot is highly intelligent and highly autonomous, and maybe in future capable of distinct moral deliberation? The scenario of artificial moral agency is a way off, but it may well happen eventually. And in this scenario, robots would be very human-like. Their personal autonomy would closely approximate the autonomy that we have. And we could possibly treat a robot as if it were one of us, even though it isn't. Well, that brings some issues of its own, because basically that brings us to questions of responsibility. Right now, the law is very clear about whether AI robots or intelligent devices have responsibility. They don't. They are merely objects, tools of their human operators, designers, or owners. And this is consistent with the argument from nature and the doctrine of creation. These devices are human creations. But if robots are autonomous, we might have to argue that they have some degree of responsibility. And of course, this then raises the question of whether they should have rights akin to human rights. And if so, what rights should robots have? What also matters is how autonomous agents, whether human or robotic, use their autonomy, whether for good or bad actions. As we've seen from the robots we met earlier, the cultural perception is that there are good and bad robots just as much as there are good and bad human beings. What might make a difference, however, is other factors that you might see with a robotic autonomous bad actor. It might be that a robotic Hitler or Stalin, devoid of any human foibles or empathy, would have inflicted torture and oppression more ruthlessly and mercilessly than any human dictator. What a cheery thought. But all these problems about autonomy are indicative of the kind of murky pit that we will get into in a society where we will share lives with robots that are quite a lot like us. Now, of course, culturally, we have negotiated all these issues before with the development of modern human rights over the last 300 years. But we would then have to go through the same painful process with revolutions and big debates and all that might involve with postmodern robot rights. How are we doing so far? Well, let's move on to our third topic of embodiment. Okay, so as our encounter with the robots of science fiction suggests, the more humanoid a robot looks, the more we are likely to treat it as one of us. And the more that we will learn from the humanoid robot about what it means for us to be human. In short, the humanoid form of the robot makes it more relatable to us. And now this is perfectly understandable, and in a sense it's aligned with Christian theology. From a Christian perspective, the notion of human embodiment, living life in bodily form, is an important one, and it runs through the Christian gospel like a stick of rock. God created us in bodily form. God became incarnate in bodily form as one of us, as Jesus. Christ was raised from the dead in bodily form. We too will be raised at the eschaton in bodily form. You get the general picture. So in itself, embodied life is a good, and it makes sense of many aspects of human experience. We can't possibly hope to fully understand human experiences such as eating, sport, or sex without the bodies that we have. But this does lead us into problems in relating to beings like robots that look like us but really aren't like us. We are more likely to treat an intelligent autonomous robot as one of us if it looks like us. But as we have heard, the robot does not share our nature and may be very different to us mentally. The danger is that we are drawn into a relationship with our robot friend, possibly one in which we may be vulnerable, or we may make ourselves vulnerable, and yet it is a relationship that the robot cannot possibly reciprocate, because, intelligent though it might be, it has neither the mental interiority nor the physical bodily experience that we do as human beings. Apparently, even today, there are a lot of people who talk to ChatGPT about their personal problems. Did you know that? An awful lot of people that do that. But what on earth can that disembodied, jumped-up data collator really understand about intimate human relationships? How much more will human beings make this mistake with intelligent robots that look very human indeed? Let me refer you back to 6 of Battlestar Galactica. This, let's face it, is the trap that Dr. Gaius Balfour fell into. And as I'm going to, a trigger warning for you all here, but it's an important subject. Did you know that an awful lot of money being invested in cybernetic research is being spent on the development of sex robots? Now, absolutely true. There's a real market for sex robots because people think these robots will provide the perfect physical sexual experience for them, one that is completely customized to their particular desires or fantasies. But the irony is that they seek this perfect physical connection with a being who is ultimately mentally unconnected with them. The robot lover will not have a mentality anything like ours. Not only are they unknown, they are unknowable, and they can never provide the emotional connection that makes loving sex good and worthwhile. So, the humanoid nature of the robots provides us with a beguiling challenge. We want to think they are human, they may even appear to be human in some respects, but mentally they are not human, and they are ultimately unknowable and unrelatable as beings. So, that brings us to our final point about the Imago Dei, the image of God in humanity. And I've left this one till last because it's possibly the most complicated one. Oh, I can see your faces sinking already. Right, so the question we are asking here is this. Would a society with robotics uphold the image of God in humanity, or would it distort the image of God in humanity? If we were to accept machinic beings in society, would we be good image bearers, or would we be seeking to be like God, as expressed in Genesis 3 verse 5? So again, a little bit of a theological workup is necessary here. So we read in Genesis 1 verse 26 that God said, "Let us make humanity in our image." And this image of God motif recurs at various points through the Bible, and it is concerned with the material representation of humanity. It is concerned with the sanctity of life. And in the New Testament, Jesus is presented as the perfect image, the visible image of the invisible God. Colossians 1 verse 15, a crucial Bible verse. And the restoration and perfection of God's image in humanity is to be found in spiritual transformation through belief in Jesus. But what is it about humanity that constitutes the image of God in us? Well, the Bible is not explicit about this, and you can interpret it in different ways, but over the centuries, theologians have come up with 4 basic theories. So the first theory is a substantive approach, that the image of God in us is not about our human, it is about our human attributes. So theologians such as Augustine and Aquinas equated the image of God with human rationality, perfect human rationality. The second theory is the functional approach, that the image of God is about our God-given vocation to act well in the world, and has very clearly ethical dimensions. The third theory is the relational approach, that the image of God is grounded in our relationships, our particular relationship with God and with each other. So that I-thou relationship that we've referred to in the title. And the fourth theory is the eschatological approach. The image of God is about our potential to be transformed in a Godward direction through relationship with Jesus. So how do we best image God in the world? Well, the reality is that all 4 approaches are valid and may be applicable to us. We are creatures with material attributes. We have a purpose for God in this world. We are relational, and we have potential for perfectibility through relationship with God and union with Christ. And how could biomedical technology interfere with how we image God? Well, this could happen because technology may distort the image in us. I argue in Transhumanism, Ethics and the Therapeutic Revolution that many enhancement technologies focus on human physical attributes and therefore align with a substantive image of God at the expense of the other three. So using some enhancement technologies may lead to a deficient outworking of the image of God in human society. At the end of the day, a human person is not just a rational machine, but a person who can relate to God and others personally in the I-thou relationship and has a specific God-given vocation and destiny compared to the other creatures. And of course we see subhuman assumptions about humanity all the time in relationship to technology. Yes, ChatGPT can probably write a better essay than even I can, but I'm more than an intelligent word compiling machine, despite the books that I've written. So what are the implications of all this for a robotic world? Well, if robots are used for the rational, repetitive, analytical tasks of our world that we generally don't do as well as machines can do, this will free us up to do the relational, intuitive human stuff that we're good at. Now, any AI business text will tell you all that stuff. But what we've got to bear in mind is that it will also uphold us as image bearers, because it will take away the focus take the focus away from our attributes of body and mind, reflecting a purely substantive understanding of the image of God, and enable us to focus on relationships, our proper purposes in our world, and our potential for spiritual transformation, which comprise the other three approaches. Ultimately, our God-given purpose in the world is to be image bearers, not physical and mental doers. It's possible then that more robots in the world may help to accentuate our essential humanness in God's eyes as image bearers. Now, of course, there are risks, again relating to the extent that the robots can become like us. If a time comes where we can create highly intelligent robots capable of deliberation, reflection and moral agency and all those human graces, then, as I've said, the robot will seem a lot like us and we'll be tempted to treat it like us. But they will still be our creations, not human creatures. And if we were to create the most human-like robot that could pass any Turing test and do anything we can do, we might regard it as the pinnacle of human creativity and technological achievement. As creators, we would have ultimate power over what is, for all intents and purposes, another human being. You can see where I'm going with this, can't you? We would be like God, Genesis 3 verse 5. And our sinful motivation would mar the image of God in us. We might come to regard our huge technological achievement as perhaps more important than a God that is not tangible to us, we can't see and easily know. And we might fall prey to the sin of idolatry, where we worship our creations rather than the God who created us. And then, when there are many robots in the world, and when we are least expecting it, they will rebel and kill us as frail organic creatures in ways that we may not wish to dwell on. And the scenario that Czech playwright Karel Čapek envisaged in his play over a century ago would become a reality. The deployment of robots in the world is therefore clearly risky, not just to our physical lives as human beings, on which God's image in us rests, but also our spiritual lives. And a lack of godly wisdom in a world of robots could expose us to some very old and dangerous sins. So, how are we to respond as Christians? Okay. Well, it's easy to think that robots are some distant future prospect that we don't need to think about just now. But artificial intelligence is moving on apace, and as I've explained, it's the thin end of the wedge. Sooner or later, we will have robots powered by artificial intelligence that will look, sound, and think a lot like us. Now, we can see from popular culture that robots can be culturally acceptable. They will be autonomous, they will be highly intelligent, they will look like us, but they will still only be our creations, and we must remember that this is the case. They won't be the same as us physically or mentally, but as I hope I have shown, although these robots will indubitably bring about some social changes and introduce some ethical issues, they are not entirely completely incompatible from a perspective of Christian ethics. It's how we use them, and they will arrive. Now, we will be facing a new situation. For the first time in history, once we have created the perfect robot, we will have created what is essentially not just another tool or piece of artwork, but another sentient being. And as Christians, it would be good and the right thing for us to treat these sentient beings with some dignity. Because of their intelligence, which may well in future be very sophisticated, we can't merely treat them as objects like our kettle or our radio. On Battlestar Galactica, the humans put the Cylons very firmly in their place by calling them toasters. I'm not quite sure that's a Christian response. But rather than inanimate objects, perhaps a better way of thinking of robots in the future is as an intelligent, non-human creature, of whom we already have quite a few in the world, as an animal. Still not quite right, because animals are organic creatures, not synthetic human creations. But to treat robots as, if you like, a species, would at least appropriately respect them as sentient beings. It would open up the prospect of them having some responsibility for their actions and some rights as to how we should treat them and how they might expect to be treated. This would be a new situation, but there are other aspects of the world that would be unchanged. Humanity still has a unique relationship with God, and if we are wise, the presence of robots will not invalidate that relationship and may even accentuate its important features. And robots will simply be another sentient being in the world, like the many species of animals, yet another part of God's groaning creation which he longs to bring to fulfillment. And in future there will be similar questions about the theological status of robots, whether they can know God, whether robots will be in heaven, the same kind of questions as we have currently about animals. However, the prospect of a robot world brings, in my view, a very real opportunity for Christian mission and witness. Now, over the last 300 years, since the Enlightenment and then the Industrial Revolution, our humanity has sadly been very gradually eroded. The big corporations treat people as functionaries only, human resources. And although physical working conditions are better these days, even our modern knowledge economy treats us as no more than portable data repositories. And modern secularized medicine treats the human body as a machine and an expendable one as that, if attitudes to assisted dying is anything to go by. Whatever we think about technology and its intervention into humanity, we can't go on like this as human beings. And in this secularized world, when faced with technology such as AI that takes away their skills and roles, many people feel useless and unappreciated, with no hope or purpose. But the Christian faith is in a prime position to speak into that situation. We understand what it means to be truly human, to be loved and to love God and love our neighbour as ourselves, to serve God in this world through our specific vocations, and to enjoy the hope of life in this world and with Jesus in the next. That's why I'm standing before you today, because all of that is important. So how then shall we live? What should be our call to action? 3 things. First, make sure we understand the technologies, whatever they are, and make sure that we pray for those who are implementing those technologies and working closely with them. So that's probably the AI tech bros who have a good deal of power in this situation. But we should also pray for all technology implementers, for governments, and for all in authority who make important decisions about technology. Second, we need to make sure that we witness to humanity with in all its fullness, with our words and actions in our workplaces, in our communities, our churches, our families, and any circle of influence in which we move. Remember, human beings are image bearers, not physical or mental doers. And thirdly, we must campaign on issues of justice and the common good in relation to technology. Sadly, at least some of the injustices that we face in society are technologically mediated. For example, digital systems devised by white people which do not recognise the biometrics of black people, or which algorithmically discriminate against different racial ethnic groups. An important thing to remember is that these issues are not just technological. They are about humanity, society, and justice. And if we can learn to address these now and start reflecting on them, we will be in a better position to have life in abundance in a world alongside our robot companions. Thank you very much. Okay, before questions, I'm just going to briefly mention, Dan's mentioned my books already, for which I'm very grateful, but also I have got a Grove book coming out. So any of you who know about Grove booklets, they're nice and thin, they're very cheap, and I've got one coming out which essentially takes ideas from both books and talks about the idea how we can develop technologies for the common good, and what we can do as Christians and churches to encourage all that in the right direction. Thank you. Sorry, over to you, Dan.
Right, let's give another big round of applause. Thank you, Stephen. That was tremendous, tremendous. All right, let's get started. Normally it's the prerogative of the moderator to ask the first question, but I'm not going to do that because Stephen's my friend. I can call him up any time and ask my questions. So, who would like to be the first and give it a go? Okay, right here in the front.
Really interesting. Thank you for all you've shared. One point. Straight off the back, your definition of cyborg that you said was a long way off. By the definition you gave, a human with a prosthetic limb or a pacemaker could be described as a cyborg.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
now, in that regard, the Bible writers repeatedly state God knows the number of your days. Mm-hmm. If that is the case, are we supporting the theory that God foresaw the pacemaker and now has equated that mathematical equation into the number of your days? And secondly to that is further on another point, and I'm just applying it to that picture. The surgeon doesn't take responsibility for any actions of the person he gives a pacemaker to. Now, my father has a pacemaker, and he's alive because of that. Now, if he goes out and robs a bank, the surgeon doesn't take responsibility for keeping him alive. That is down to him. Now, he is now a product of God and man because he is now a cyborg. Mm-hmm. That, I would say, goes on to the whole question mark of autonomous robotics, where actually randomness, that is fairly much at the heart of what I see the human condition, so far cannot be replicated. It can be imitated by computers, but it cannot be replicated. The algorithm can be so large that it seems random, but actually it is still defined by an equation.
Okay, so you're saying that obviously prosthetics is, if you like, the sort of the thin end of the wedge of robotics, yeah. Yeah, I accept what you say with inert, with implants that are inert. Absolutely, you wouldn't expect any kind of designer or surgeon to take responsibility for those. However, I think the more autonomous the components, where you may have unforeseen circumstances, then obviously, you know, there will be more of, regardless of the ethics of doing the procedure in the first place, there will be, I think, more onus on the implanter or technician who creates that situation. So I think as components become more inert, so for example, you put in, someone has an optical implant that will enable them to, you know, for infrared vision, which they then use for shooting people or whatever at night. That kind of slightly makes it a slightly more dangerous technology than a pacemaker. So I think that there are ways you're right. So, prosthetics is the thin end of the wedge for cybernetics, but I think it can be transformed depending on what kind of thing it is.
I have an upgrade ahead of my head to now say this. Society has changed because of how many people are now claiming a pension because they are being kept alive by non-natural, and by that I mean it didn't fall through, it wasn't created by God. It was created by a man helping a person live beyond their years. So we have already seen bionics, if you want to use that phrase, cybernetics, change society.
Yeah, there are lots of things, not just cybernetic things, that enable us to live a lot longer than we could 50, 100 years ago. So,
Medicines and
the
medical profession seems to be aimed at the moment to prolong life.
well, and and actually that's what we want to do. We want to, the problem is not so much that we live a long time. The problem is that quite often the latter part of that time is not good life. So that's the kind of the important bit.
Bad thing to not exercise. We choose to live a bad life.
I'm not saying that's wrong, because I'm not the judge to make that decision. What I'm saying is, I know, I have grandparents who ended their days in a bed for many, many years. That was not life as I knew it, and one of those was not thinking too well, and they were being kept alive by what we call a health system under
Numbered their days, but the way we live our life gave them a worse end of life. Right?
Just pause this for a second. Matt and Mary, if
feel free to have that discussion.
Yeah, there's
after.
some great discussions here, but I want to give as many people an opportunity as possible. We've got Angus and then Steve and Michael. So Angus first.
So thank you. That was an amazing framework, and I'm digesting it in my head. I wondered if I could just chuck out a reasonably near-term example. So weapons are being developed which give a greater degree of autonomy to those weapon systems. So scenario might be hostages are taken, there's bad guys and good guys in the room, you send in some kind of robot to distinguish which is which, sort out the bad guys in whatever way, and that's it. So it's giving an executive level of command, as opposed to operating outside of the room.
Yeah.
I just wonder what your thoughts are on applying your excellent framework.
So I think there are political problems and ethical problems with that. So the political problems is whether it's right for any sovereign state to do that and to hand over that kind of degree of executive responsibility. We'll park that one for the moment, okay? But the other question that we would then want to ask is that very much relies on that technology absolutely being able to sort the bad guys from the good guys. And there's been a couple of TV dramas that have explored this, and the answer is they are often fallible. So yeah, that situation is quite tricky, really. And falls into the category of you give a robot autonomy, what does it do with it? And I guess the amount of autonomy you are prepared to give your robot might depend on the kind of risks you expect it to take with its executive decision making.
Great, good question. A lot of these questions won't have answers, will they?
No, they won't. Sorry if I haven't given you an answer,
Yes,
but that's
that's
the basic work
it's
upon
great,
now, I
great
think,
to hear
be
your
honest.
thoughts.
No, thanks for tonight. It's been brilliant. My question: you mentioned robots perhaps becoming sentient. I wondered if you could define sentient, and how does that, as a human being, I have a body, a soul, and a spirit. My soul belongs to God. How does that work with a robot that may become sentient?
It's a very good question. So what we've got to bear in mind is the idea of the soul is a hugely contested and very difficult concept in itself. Can a robot have a spiritual life? We just don't know. But the whole idea of a soul is something that we struggle with in modern terms anyway, because we struggle with the idea of there being an entity within us that is not a material entity. And I think a lot of theologians prefer to use the idea of the God breath within us that is what makes us spiritual. So I think that's a hugely complex question. I would say that robots don't have a soul, but that's a quick answer. Yeah, sorry, your initial question. Yeah, so I think if you've got beings that are that have that mental interiority, and they are able to reflect on their environment, I think you have something that's responding more than just instinctively. Now, a lot of animals respond instinctively, but we know from animal studies a lot of animals do stuff that they exhibit that we don't know for sure because they don't talk. And there's only so many ways we can get data from them, but basically animals do quite a lot of things that we believe has reflective content. For example, things like altruism and things like that. So Celia Dean Drummond has written on this quite extensively and knows much more about it than I do.
I would just add, some theologians have, I think, rightfully said, I do not have a soul, I am a soul. And the soul is what is me. The soul is the whole person. And then we have the material bodily outworking of that soul. But hugely complex. Can a robot have that? Well, that's a question. But can a robot be sentient? Maybe is a slightly different.
Yes.
Different
sentient is about being an intelligent feeling being, basically.
So
I
over
think
to
you can say that.
Thank you. Over to Michael.
Basically, to say thank you and for affirming all sorts of positive things. Essentially, that robots, however clever, can never be relational in the way that we can. And it goes back to the I-thou thing, that ultimately, as Buber says, human beings are thous, and God is a thou.
Yeah.
Although we treat him as an it sometimes, and we treat people as its. And but an extremely clever, even a sentient robot is still going to be an it.
Still only an it. Yeah, no, exactly.
I mean, one of the most challenging things you said was about who controls these semi-autonomous robots.
Absolutely, and actually that's not just a robotics question either.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
there's a lot of work done on brain-computer interfaces for people who face major brain injuries, to enable them to interact with the world, and as soon as you have any kind of component like that, you have the possibility of reverse functionality. So while the right brain-computer interface will enable someone with major brain injuries to interact with the world, it also enables the world to interact with that brain. So it's a problematic area, but as soon as you have machines involved with a person's personal autonomy, then you are open to external influences. The problem.
So it's already an issue, isn't it?
It is, yes.
But the whole thing, the whole political thing about who controls the algorithms and so on.
Precisely so, yeah. And
we're destined for a technological feudalism, which is somebody's phrase.
I've heard the phrase.
So we become its in the face of people's power.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And we're able to use it.
Well, that absolutely. So a lot of, certainly about AI, a lot of theorists say you've got to absolutely have an off switch. I don't know if you've heard of Stuart Russell. He's a major AI theorist, and he is very worried about the kind of the existential threats, the standard sort of existential threat stuff of humanity, and he talks about there needs to be an off switch, but we are also aware of many forms of AI, laboratory AI, that actually learn to bypass their off switch, which is so unfortunately we will find that they can be cleverer than us. But of course we can do all kinds. We have to police human society. So there's a sense in which some of these are not unique problems. Anyway, there we go.
Great, Jonathan, and then Rosie. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you talked about transhumanism near the beginning. Is transhumanism the end to which we're inevitably going to get to?
So some would say we are already there in terms of the way we rely on technology. It's just our technologies aren't as futuristic as some of those that some of the transhumanist thinkers have thought of. So actually, we already want to use medical technology at will. We are often uncritical about how it is used. So you could say that we are there already with that problem. But yes, there will be some people who will say that is the direction in which it is going. We are wanting to transcend our human nature, and actually there's some real goods of being human. And I think, as you probably gathered from what I was saying, I think it's really important we hold on to those goods in a world that is advancing technologically and often in an uncritical way.
And then Dave? We'll go to Rosie and then Dave, yeah. All right.
My question is a bit confused, but it's about calling robots sentient and then how we should treat them and give them rights when people are already, like you say, falling into the trap of chatting to ChatGPT as if it's a person. So I feel like we're going to have to be so careful to keep them separate. Because I treat my dog, used to, carefully because he's sentient, but I look after my computer because it's valuable. But those are two really different
They are two really different things.
But if we start saying, people, you must treat robots give them their rights, we're kind of saying to them, they're like these equal sentient beings, and isn't that just leading us more into that trap?
Yeah, well, they're certainly different to your dog, that's for sure. Those are the questions we have to consider if you have beings who will give you arguments as to why they shouldn't be turned off. And again, you can look at these situations as a humanistic perspective. So, for example, capital punishment. People will have arguments about why they shouldn't be executed, and these situations arise regularly. So it is, it's a very difficult area, but I think as Christians, we can't just treat these things as if they are objects, even though they are. So that's the dilemma that we face, basically.
So this is a question on the same point. There's a lot talked about being conscious beings, and there's a lot of debate as to what that really means, and we don't really understand it.
No.
And at the moment, we think that's the difference between something which we create mechanically and a human being, that we have a consciousness that makes us different. There are some people who believe that given time, we'll make machines that develop a conscious ability. Have you got any thoughts on that?
So the problem we have with all of this is that we don't really understand human consciousness. So it's really hard to say. And I kind of avoided the word consciousness with this whole debate, because actually it's a term we don't really understand what it means for us. So it's hard to know how that might pan out with intelligent machines, even though they are not there yet. And which is why I use the term sentient, as in able to reflect on about their environment. And to sense their environment. So I kind of use that phrase instead. So your question was exactly, sorry?
Do you ever think that a man-made machine will develop to the state of being conscious like a human being?
I think it could develop to a point where it has some deliberative capacity. Because we don't quite know what, I'm not sure we can say it will become conscious, because we don't know what it means for ourselves to be conscious.
Okay, one slightly light-hearted question then, in response to that. If you get one robot abusing another robot, who is responsible?
Oh, well, there we go. So hang on, are you talking about consciousness or conscience? Okay, no, okay. Fair enough. Yeah. A good point. Well, again, you would be looking at a situation of retributive justice, as we currently are in human society.
These are very difficult questions. I'm going to draw this to a close,
Yeah,
but I'm going to give Theo. I'm giving Theo the last question.
Theo,
he's been waiting a long time.
Thank you for granting me the last question. So going off what Rosie was talking about, and maybe just to stir the pot a little, when we're talking about the idea of are robots sentient, do we treat them as anything, do we just treat them as an object or something else? I find it interesting how you were talking earlier about how people talk to AI or robots as if they're a friend, and you talked about sometimes the development of kind of robots for sex in some places.
The other area is grief bots. I don't know if you've come across those. The whole idea of that people, there are companies that will create an avatar of your deceased loved one from their digital footprint.
Wow.
Which is, and again, that raises all kinds of issues. And sorry, your question. So you could add that to the mix. But what was your question? Sorry.
So if we're considering the possibility of robots being sentient, or us treating them differently, or giving them rights, let's say a hypothetical situation that in the future a Christian human decides to marry a robot. I mean, there's already debate in the church about kind of same-sex marriage and stuff like that. But let's say in the future there's debates about whether a person can be one flesh with a robot. How should the church respond to a do we view that marriage as a holy marriage, or is this not marriage? Because if we're saying they have rights, if we're saying they're sentient, then things like marriage are going to crop up.
If you decide to end right here, we won't blame you.
No, that's fine. So, I mean, I think you've got to say that this would not be an I-thou relationship. I don't think you could say, whatever you might think of the rights of that being, to have a life where they're allowed to think freely, they are allowed to, they are not tortured or in any way mistreated. I think it's a whole different ball game to the whole question of whether they could marry a being who is completely different to them. And you could use the same argument with aliens, couldn't you? You could say, if aliens beam down, would it be right for us to form relationships with them? I think the church is still struggling, frankly, with the marriage issues that it already has. So I personally think we shouldn't put that in front of the bishops anytime soon. So, but there we go.
To say the least. Well, every question raises many other questions. This could go on and on. But thank you, everyone, for coming tonight, for sharing in this occasion, and for your participation. It's been a real pleasure to host this, and once again, a big thank you to Stephen for coming and sharing tonight.